Think about those brands and products that have that role in their lives. Did they get to there because they spend all of their time obsessing about what other people think, what customers think?
If there was one thing you feel like you really want leaders to hear right now, what would it be?
Don't retreat behind strategy jargon. And brand is not a marketing conversation. Brand is a conversation about...
Welcome to the Rev Up Rebellion, the podcast for revenue leaders rewriting the rules of growth. I'm your host, Abbie White. Today we have got with us Matt Jones, and his journey initially started out in politics, went through to brand experience, and then went on to found a world-renowned gin company, 4 Pillars Gin. He has also, during his time, helped some global brands to achieve absolutely phenomenal things, which we touch on in this conversation. So he began his career as the youngest chief political advisor in the UK, working with the likes of Theresa May, before in 2006 pivoting towards working with brands and experience in Sydney. In 2013, alongside 2 others, Matt founded 4 Pillars Gin, growing it into a business that has been named world's best distillery 3 times. Matt, I have to kick off with the question we always ask everyone. What is an idea or a concept that you really feel like you want to rebel against? Or maybe it's just a conversation you feel should be having more airtime and more leaders should be focusing on right now, and you kind of want to elevate that conversation.
So can I cheat and give you 2 answers? So
you can cheat.
I'll start by giving you the answer I would have given you any time up to 3 months ago.
Ooh.
Which is that we do not talk enough or accurately enough about what brand means in business.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, there's so much debate in the marketing world about sort of performance marketing versus brand marketing. And brand is not a marketing conversation. Brand is a conversation about how people feel about your business. So I think up until 3 months ago, I said undoubtedly it would be correcting the error that so many leaders have when they think about brand. I think right now, the thing I want to rebel against is how we are thinking about AI. I think there is far too much conversation about AI as a tool of sort of productivity and creativity. And undoubtedly, just like computers and word processors changed how we did things and made things. And back in 1995, you might have been proud of the fact that you could use Excel. Very soon, you're going to be proud of the fact that you can use a large language model to do things. But I think the more profound conversation business leaders need to have is how AI is going to transform their category, our culture, and our world. And I think we need to be getting ready to adapt our businesses for a world of AI. So a bit of brand correction and a bit of what the hell is going on and where is our culture going.
I love that. So let's go into both of those. So if I take brand first, I think, so I've been reading, I'm glued to the book. Look how many so my definition of whether it's a good book is how many sticky notes I've got. And you're doing seriously well. It's like
I'm thrilled.
It's a really official rating and ranking system. But the journey on 4 Pillars Gin, you know, your seat on the bus, my understanding is sort of co-CEO was more around brand and strategy. And as you said in the book, really embedding it in everything you do. And I want to start with that brand correction conversation, because you don't become, you know, voted world's best distillery three times, I think it was, without the strong brand. But I want to dive into that because I think brand is sometimes associated with, you've got a cool logo, the bottle that we were looking at before, you know, it's got the really cool shape, and it's kind of almost boiled down to really like basic things, which I don't think is true. So can we actually start on that around the clarification and then that the part that brand played in 4 Pillars growth?
100%. And maybe if I sort of rewind back and ask myself a different question, people often ask me sort of, why did you get involved in 4 Pillars? Why did you get involved in gin? And for me, it was a fascinating category because I'd spent years of my life, decades of my life in the worlds of politics and brand strategy and brand experience. And I was really excited to have an opportunity to sort of put my ideas and put my thinking to the test, sort of put my own money where my mouth was. And as we built 4 Pillars, we never sort of thought, let's build a great brand. What we wanted to do was build a great business. We wanted to build a great gin business. And the exciting thing for me about gin is that gin is a product. It's not vodka. You know, vodka is absence. Vodka is effectively the absence of flavor. Gin is all about flavor. Gin is distilled juniper. That's what makes it gin. But then it's anything else you want to distill on top of that. So I could see immediately that thanks to my 2 co-founders, we could make really distinct, different, and better gin. But equally, you could see that in a category like craft spirits or luxury spirits, you weren't going to win unless you also had a great brand, but people don't want to buy brands. They want to buy products. They want to buy craft. They want to buy excellence and expertise. So the question was, how do we make people feel those things? And that for me is all we mean, that we need the language of brand simply because there is your business. There is the value that you create in the world, but then there's the value you create in people's minds. There's the value people perceive you create. There's the logic of what you do, and there's the emotion of how you make people feel. And that gap between the two, that's brand. That's all it is. We don't really need that language other than to explain the difference between the rational value you create and the emotional value that people feel you create. So my role at 4 Pillars was to make sure that we got the credit we deserved for the craft that went into the gin. It was never to invent a fiction. It was never to create this separateness and become fascinated by logos and design. It was always just to make sure that we were telling the right stories, sending the right signals, creating the right feelings that was revealing the truth of this absolute obsession we had with trying to make the world's best gin here in Australia.
Yeah. And I think you talked in the book a lot actually about that level of, I need to find the wording because it was so good, uncompromising commitment to quality and product excellence before anything, before profit, before anything else, and that it was more around the product than the marketing. Can you talk to us about that? Because when I read that, I was like, wow, that's a real big statement. And it's kind of what you're saying there. Your job was kind of actually bringing some of that excellence to life.
Correct. And at the same time, being incredibly fortunate that I had 2 co-founders who could actually deliver on that promise. I mean, I think, if you sort of peel back the layers of any great business, the starting point has to be extraordinary product. If you are not, it's very rare that the world needs a new anything. I mean, occasionally you come across a category that is just emerging, and maybe there's an opportunity for people to bring real novelty and excitement. But for the most part, most of us who launch something, whether we're launching a gin or a marketing agency or whatever, we are entering a crowded market and a crowded field. The world does not need another one of those things. The world certainly didn't need another gin. But there's always room for a better something. And the question is, well, better in what way? And better for who or better for what? But better starts with a commitment to excellence, a sense of purpose, a self-understanding. What are we trying to do here? Why do we deserve to exist? What are we going to focus on that gives us the right to say we are in some way better for someone or something? So in the case of 4 Pillars, that led to this really early decision. We're not going to be a distillery that makes gin on a Monday, dabbles with whiskey on a Tuesday, tries its hand at vodka on a Wednesday. We're just going to do one thing. And we're going to try and do that one thing as well as anyone in the world has ever done it. And that one thing is going to be making gin. And then what we think could be interesting about our gin is we're making it in Australia, which is this food and flavor basket. I mean, both of us have come to Australia from the UK. We've married Aussies. And what we've found ourselves in is this extraordinarily diverse, creative flavor culture. Like Australia is the most delicious place on earth. So the opportunity was just distill that into the gins we make, but with utter relentless passion. So we talked about, we want to be modern Australian gin makers. We're 10,000 miles from London, so we don't need to make traditional London dry gin like Gordon's and Beefeater. You probably had a bad night on Gordon's when you were young. I had a few really bad nights on Gordon's, probably about 4 years. I didn't drink gin because of it. And we're like, well, we don't need to make London dry gin. We're going to make modern Australian gin, and we are going to be gin makers. We had this mantra of being makers, not marketers. So even as we built our marketing team and, made our first marketing hire, and then 10 years later, we'd have our weekly marketing whip and there were 22 people in the room, and we'd still say to them, bad news, guys, our job is not to be heroes. Our job is just to be the sort of the amplifiers, the sort of loudspeakers, but the music, that's the gin. We're not here to be noticed. We want people to look at everything we do, every piece of content, every piece of marketing, and go, what extraordinarily passionate gin makers 4 Pillars are, not what clever advertisers they are, what brilliant marketers they are. So absolutely that commitment to product above all, but then recognizing that your product is only as good as the credit people give you for your product. That you can't just create a great product and expect to get the credit you deserve. And that's the balancing act between a business with great product at the heart of it, but then a business that builds a great brand and gets the credit and therefore the growth that it deserves.
Oh my gosh, I got 12 questions off the back of that. So I want to come back to that point you said about everything you do. And like, I noticed that a lot in the book. You're talking about the small decisions, the small details, and how that sort of built into big things. And then you said there about having the marketing whip, and suddenly you've got 22 people, and your growth journey was pretty, like, as a reader, I was like, wow, that's fast. Probably didn't feel fast at the time, but it feels fast when you're reading it. How do you instill that in every single person in your business and not lose that? Because some of the core, I felt like when I was reading about the journey, as the three co-founders, you had that real strong clarity of everything we do. But then how do you instill that in everyone as you scale and grow?
It's such a good question. And I think there's three dimensions to what you just packed into that question. I think the first is this fundamental, there's so many misunderstandings. We've already talked about the misunderstanding about brand, and your brand is not your logo. Your brand is not your design system. Yeah. Your brand guidelines are not the instruction manual of how to run your business. Your brand is about how you make people feel. And if you understand that, then you need to understand something else, which is your business is not going to succeed because of a big idea. It is very likely that you do not have a big idea. It was not when people say to me, where did you get the idea to make gin? It's like, dude, it's not an idea. If it was an idea, it was an idea Mr. Gordon had back in the 1700s, and he stole it from the Dutch, who made a product called Hennever with juniper. Like, making gin is not an idea. It is a decision. And I think this is the truth of most businesses. We are just making decisions. And every decision we make, it's like opening a door. And inside that next room are another 10, 20, 30 decisions we've got to make. Great businesses exist and grow and thrive because they get those decisions right consistently, and those decisions line up. The logic of those decisions is strong. So at some stage, this is really at the heart of your question, you outgrow the ability for the founder or the co-founders to be making all those decisions. So you need to start to empower and sort of infuse everyone in your business with that same logic, with that same instinctive understanding. So how we did that at 4 Pillars was just the constant act of storytelling. You know, I think of myself probably in two modes. As a speechwriter for a long time, I love language. My mum was an English teacher. I'm a good storyteller. I know that. I'm a good writer. But I also like to think of myself as a strategic thinker, as a strategist in agency land. And really, strategy is just clarity. Strategy is just the creation of clarity around the decision architecture around, there are so many decisions in front of us. We could call them tactics. What is the overarching clarifying thought or theory that's going to unify how we're going to make all of those decisions? I've always seen strategy at its best as an act of storytelling. If we ask people to digest a strategy on a page, they won't. If we try and give them a complex strategy framework, they will forget it. If we tell them stories consistently that reflect and sort of embody the thought processes behind that strategy, those stories will stick. So that's my long answer to your simple question. We didn't just tell the stories of 4 Pillars to our consumers and our customers. We kept telling the story of what we were trying to build, where we were trying to go, and how we were going to be successful to ourselves and to the growing team around us.
Internally as well. That's so interesting. And on that note of sort of storytelling, which is, obviously a big passion and expertise of yours, you talk a lot around, can you tell I've just been digesting the book, every word of it? But you talk about distilling down to like a 2-minute version. I thought that was really interesting. And I reflected on, my career in sales and different places I've worked. And actually, if I'd have been asked, the whole cheesy question, could you do the elevator pitch, or better version of that question, could I actually do the storytelling and capture in 2 minutes? I'm going to be honest and reflect on some of those roles and go, I probably couldn't. And even now I reflect and go, oh, that could improve. Yeah. How do you do that magic secret sauce and distill it down to 2 minutes?
I worked for a long time with a strategist and a great friend of mine called Amber Groves, and she introduced me to this notion, which I talk about in the book, of creating a conversational hierarchy for your business and your story and your messaging. And I really like the first word in that in particular, this notion of conversation. I think we live now in a conversational age. We're in a post-advertising era. I grew up in a world where brands were built really through ads. They were built through slogans, taglines, 30-second TV ads, newspaper print ads. And so the succinctness at the heart of brand storytelling tended to belong to the marketing department, to the people crafting the ads. In fact, more often than not, it was outsourced to the advertising agency. It wasn't even really owned internally. So then when you talk to leaders, they didn't really have a conversational fluency with their story. They could get out their strategy on a page. They could recite the business's values and mission and vision and ambition and all of those interchangeable words. But if you said, just stop all of that, just plain English, tell me the story of what your business does and why your business is so extraordinary and what makes it different and why it matters and where you're trying to go. Leaders still to this day are not particularly comfortable in that conversational space. So I think the art that you need to practice as a leader is the art of having conversations about your business and conversations about your strategy. And I think that forces a fluency. And I don't think there has to be a script. I think you can step into 10 different elevators and tell the story 10 different ways. Because if the next 10 elevators I stand in, if someone said to me, Matt, tell me about you, I'm going to tell them a different story every time. But because I'm so fluent in the story of me, it will all sort of land in the same place. It will strike on the same beats. I think that's what we need to be able to do as businesses as well.
And I agree with you on the script piece. I know, working with a lot of sales teams, if you give them a script, it's like if you gave me a script, it doesn't sound like me. You've got to put it into your own words and sound like you. But I also feel like there's got to be some magic also working with, with what you do, working with sales teams to be able to actually articulate that as well. Because even now, too much of the time, I feel we still go to, let's talk about the product. Let's talk about the gin or whatever it is, or my technical widgety product, versus actually that art of appreciating the value in the emotional side of it, the emotional connection in the story.
100%. And there's probably two things. I mean, I do, like you, I do a lot of keynote speaking, as I know you do, and I do a fair bit of advisory work, and I guess you call it consulting work. And two often gaps and sometimes just sort of shortfalls that I see. One is I'm always pushing leaders and teams to think about what's their worldview? What's their perspective? Again, when we meet people, we often connect around shared values, shared perspective. We watch the same TV shows. We read the same books. We like to travel to the same places. We're both fascinated by the same cities. Like you meet someone else, like I lived in New York. I'm obsessed with Manhattan. You meet someone else who loves New York and you'll start connecting on what's your favorite diner and which theater, whatever it is. As businesses, we can have the same thing. What do you think about the world? What do you think about what's going on? And that then connects to another P, which is this sense of purpose. Like, what do you think is needed? What problem in the world do you exist to solve? What's special about you? What does the world need? And if we can get really good at talking about the way we see the world, our perspective, our worldview, and our sense of purpose, then without needing to talk about our product or our services, we've already started to make a bigger picture and higher order connection, which then makes it so much easier to go into, some of the things we do or some of the things we make are, some of the gins we make, some of the services we offer, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. And you talked about a lot as well. Another thing I really had to dive into was don't listen to customers. And that if you'd have listened to customers, they would have probably said, we need an Aussie alternative to Hendrix. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's fascinating, because we also always think, get feedback from your customers. What's the feedback loop from your customers? And where's that line between listen to the customers, but don't listen to the customers? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, look, I think it's advice to be taken with a grain of salt, I will acknowledge, but I do think it's important advice. And I think one of the areas is sometimes not listening to customers, and we'll talk about that. And the other is this notion of friction. I want to talk a bit about friction because I get connect. So the customer piece, I think, I challenge everyone listening to this or watching this to think about brands and products that they really connect with and that they are really loyal to, and that they have I don't think there's many products in our lives or many brands in our lives that we have a real affinity with, that we would find hard to swap for another one. If you get an email from your bank or your insurance company or your telco saying, look, we're shutting our doors. We're gone. We are NAB and we're just out of business. We can't be bothered anymore. You would roll your eyes. You would feel enormously frustrated that you had to shift your mortgage, your banking, you had to set up a new insurance contract, whatever it is. But fundamentally, you wouldn't care. You don't have strong feelings. And yet, maybe the moisturizer you use or your shampoo or a particular brand of olive oil, there'll be certain things. And so one of my ambitions always with 4 Pillars was to get 4 Pillars onto that list for people. That, to me, that sense of loyalty, what in marketing jargon you'd call heavy buyers, not light buyers, real loyalists, was super important. Now, I would challenge people listening to this to think about those brands and products that have that role in their lives and think, did they get to there because they spent all of their time obsessing about what other people think and what customers think? Or did they get to that place because they focused on what they believe? Because they focused on what they believe is important. So I'll give you a great example. I think I'll give you two, beginning with A. Let's go with Apple and Aesop. At the global level, it's a cliche. Apple and Steve Jobs, absolute sense of vision. At an Australian level, Aesop, extraordinary skincare business, now fragrance business created by Dennis Perfidis. I think in both cases, Dennis Perfidis and Steve Jobs built the businesses and created the products that they believed in. And then they made the world want them. I think it was their vision. I think it was their passion. I think it was their unique understanding of what was possible and desirable and special and beautiful and magical. That's what compelled people to turn those businesses into multi-billion-dollar businesses. Not that they spent all their time obsessing, but what will someone else think? Do people want this? Is there a market for this? And I think one of the reasons this is so true is that people tend to want what they know they can have. And if you have an ability to envision something that does not currently exist, if you see a gap in the market, the world does not need another thing, but it always can benefit from a different and better thing. If you can see that different and better thing for your category, the only way your customers are going to ask for it is if they can see it as well. But let's assume that you have perspective, you have something unique that you can see, something unique you can offer. Well, then your customers don't know that exists yet. You have to have the confidence and conviction to take that to market, to present it in the best possible way, to tell the best stories about it, create the best experiences around it, and show them why they need it. And I think listening to customers all the time can be very distracting from that challenge and that art of backing your conviction. And that then connects to this notion of friction as well, because in a way, offering people things that they do not know they want, that maybe they didn't even know they could have, means to some extent you've got to rewrite the rules of the category. You've got to rewrite the expectations of customers. Perhaps you're then going to attach a name to your business or your category that people have never heard before, find hard to say. All of this is friction. Friction is good. Friction gets you noticed. Friction is something that people's brains kind of catch on and kind of go, oh, that's interesting. That's different. Is it Aesop or Aesop? I guarantee if Dennis Perfidis had gone to a lot of brand studios, brand agencies in the early days, they'd have said, oh, mate, Aesop, do people really know the Greek fable guy? And is it Aesop? Is it Aesop? It's an AE Greek diphthong. That's hard to say. Why don't we simplify this name? No. Aesop is a brand where he wants people to cross the street. He wants people to walk out of a store because they don't stock it and cross the city and find the Aesop store and the funky location and walk in there and be immersed in that sensory, beautiful experience. So I think not listening to customers, embracing the fact that you sometimes can be hard to buy, that you sometimes are challenging the category norms and putting up some barriers can actually create a more interesting and better business and better brand. But it takes a bit of conviction and it takes a bit of courage.
That's interesting. So I decided to do my own market research. As a dedicated person, I went and bought some 4 Pillars gin. Purely, if my accountant's listening, for like research purposes as a business expense. And asked the guy, hey, what feedback do you get around this gin? Like, is it any good? As I was paying for it, and he goes, the people who buy it are fanatics. And that was the word he used. He was like, total and utter fanatics. I was like, that is interesting. So there you go. There's my contribution on my market research.
And interesting you say that. You mentioned at the top of the podcast how 4 Pillars has been named the world's leading gin producer 3 times. And I remember the first time that happened, it was at the end of 2019. So it was just before the COVID period that none of us want to talk about again. And we recognized that that had the potential to be an inflection point and an inflection point for growth. And I remember writing a chart that I took all of our sales team as well as our marketing and brand team through and said, look, we have grown this far because we have really sort of taken hold of the craft gin fanatics, and that was exactly the word we used. And I said, look, this is going to start to open up the possibility to sell our gin to much more casual buyers, people who have a more passing relationship with the gin category. The fanatics have got multiple bottles of gin at home. There's one gin they use for their martinis, and there's one they use for their Negronis, and there's one they use for their gin and tonics, and there's one they keep for special occasions or whatever it is. And hopefully all of those are 4 pillars, because we make gins for all those purposes. But there's another customer out there who buys 1 bottle of gin once a month. And, it used to be Bombay Sapphire, then they shifted to Hendrix, and we now need to shift them to 4 pillars. And so we did absolutely have the humility and the sort of self-understanding to recognize that was a different customer with a more casual and fleeting relationship with the category. They probably didn't think about gin a lot until they walked into a Dan Murphy's and noticed on their shopping list that their partner had put, buy another bottle of gin because we just finished it last night. They're not people who go to distilleries and masterclasses and follow gin brands on Instagram and all the things that we were doing to win the fanatics. And so that's where you go, well, maybe we do need to listen to those people. Maybe we do need to understand them a bit more. So I think that's a useful reminder that we need to temper that sense of, if you like, intrinsic sort of belief and conviction and being driven by a sense of purpose and passion, which was absolutely the heart of 4 pillars, with sometimes the humility to go, is our next growth going to come from different people who feel different things or have a different relationship with the category? So as with all models, some are useful. They're never completely true. They're always slightly wrong. And that notion of don't listen to the customer exclusively, but sometimes listen to the customer a little. And we did have to do that as we started to grow beyond the core fanatics. And hopefully you then recruit those casual people and they become fanatics over time.
Yeah. And I thought it was an interesting word, because it's like, I was expecting to be like, oh yeah, people like it, or yeah, we get good feedback. But saying, he was like, the way he was talking about being fanatics, I was like, wow, there's some real passion behind that. I want to dive into the growth story there, because you just sort of prompted my memory on this around hyper growth and focusing down and hyper focus versus actually bringing to market, as you talked about there, other products and so on. And I thought that was an interesting part of the story in terms of going, hang on, as you started to get the awards, the brand recognition, the growth, you kind of went, hang on, we're going to put innovation to one side, I believe, and hyper focus. But then there was also these other opportunities.
Yep.
And the marmalade story I particularly love, so you're going to have to tell that one. So how do you balance that piece between, right, we're growing, we're on a mission, when do I hyper-focus and drill down on, our award-winning product, versus when do I actually go and produce marmalade and other varieties?
Yeah. Look, there's lots to unpack there. So let's talk a bit about focus, let's talk a bit about theory, and let's talk a bit about intimacy. So our focus was on being gin makers. And that forced this enormous constraint, because the simple way to grow as a distillery is to go, well, we've made our gin, now let's make a vodka, or let's go and buy some barrels and start aging some whiskey. Those are really easy. You might call, I would not call it lazy, but you might call it a lazy path to growth. The much harder, but I think more interesting path to growth is we're gin makers. We're only going to be gin makers, but how do we grow while not pushing outside of those constraints? And so the answer at 4 pillars was both, well, let's explore gin. Let's explore everything that gin can be, and let's create those different gins for different drinks and different occasions and different serves. And let's make gins with bartenders and gins with chefs and gins with other distilleries and gins with Zoe Foster Blake at Go-To Skincare and gin with Kate Reed at Lune Croissant. Let's be the most experimental, exploratory, creative, ambitious, delicious gin makers in the world. And quite accidentally, we started to make things that were not gin, but were made from gin. So we've always had this very strong sustainability ethos, and we didn't like throwing things away. And at the bottom of every of our stills, we've got 4 production stills, 2 experimental stills. They're all named after our mums. And at the bottom of the still, after distillation, effectively a tea leaf. So all these botanicals have now been sort of used in distilling, and they've still got lots of flavor. So we now dehydrate those. We send botanicals off to make salt with Olsen salt. We make a gin chocolate with them. But the original, which you've mentioned, was taking all the gin steamed oranges and turn that into a marmalade. Cameron used to take them home and make orange cakes, which was utterly unsustainable, both for his waistline and his marriage. And so instead he found this local preservist and said, well, can you do something with this? And she made this incredible gin steamed orange marmalade. And we said, okay, we still only make gin, but we now have this made from gin program where we take all of the flavor waste and give it a second life. So that focus, that hyper focus on gin, then allowed us to unlock this enormous growth opportunity. But the growth opportunity was exclusively still within the confines of gin. So then theory. Something I think is an absolute situation vacant for so many businesses is clarity around their theory of growth. How are we going to grow? What does growth really mean to us? And how are we going to achieve growth? And I think often people overestimate how many humans they need to achieve their growth ambition. So, if we boil it down to a really simple example, an old employee of Four Pillars and a great friend of Four Pillars, a guy called Joe Worthington. Joe was a Four Pillars brand ambassador, helped to run our UK business. He's a great hospitality veteran. He's a hilarious English guy. Anyway, Joe's opened a restaurant. He's opened a restaurant in London called Senza Fondo. Go and check it out. It's in Shoreditch. It's the hottest restaurant in London right now. It's Italian. It's famous for its bottomless lasagna. You can eat as much lasagna as you want for 20 quid, but £5 Negronis and your Negronis are £5 until food hits the table. And Joe just gets it. He understands hospitality, great experience. But think about Joe's restaurant. I don't know. I'm going to guess I was there a few weeks ago. I guess it's about 80 covers, right? So let's say Joe's trying to turn tables twice a night. So he's trying to seat 160 people a night, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. You could do the maths. Joe doesn't need that many people to fill his restaurant. To have his restaurant, last I checked, it was a 3-month waiting list to get a booking there. Joe doesn't need that many people to do that. Every business can do the equivalent maths to Joe's restaurant and think, well, if that's our growth ambition, if that's how many widgets we need to sell, if that's how many clients we need to engage, well, how many people do we need to sell to? How many conversations do we need to have to achieve that? And then what's it going to take to do that? How do we need them to feel? What's the brand side of that growth theory? And so when we sort of worked through that process of Four Pillars, we figured out a couple of things. One, we figured out that back in 2013 when we launched, none of the big players in spirits were really making the most of social media. They were sort of playing the traditional wholesale game where they were trying to get ranged in bars, listed in bottle shops. So you walk into a great bar in Sydney, you see Four Pillars, then you walk into Dan Murphy's, you see Four Pillars, happy days. It's a very, very important part of the job of running a spirits business, but it's not the only part of it. So we really focused on social media, on storytelling, on building community. We were the first gin brand anywhere in the world to launch through crowdfunding, not because it made us lots of money, but because it was an opportunity to start building this sense of community, to start sort of hardwiring this act of long form storytelling and winning people over one fanatic at a time. And so that leads to this notion of intimacy. So really at the heart of our growth theory was this belief in intimacy. And if we could build those fanatical relationships rather than going, well, we've sold you one bottle of gin, now we're going to move on. Well, no, we want to have a relationship with you. We want to be the gin in your gin and tonic, the gin in your Negroni, the gin in your martini. We want to be the gin that you buy at Christmas. We want to be the gin that you gift to everyone you love. We want to be the gin you give on Father's Day and ask to receive on Mother's Day. We want to be all of that. We want a deep relationship. We want to be the place that you visit in the Yarra Valley before you choose which wineries you're going to come to. You put Four Pillars on the map. We want to be the place in Surrey Hills and Sydney where you come for grown-up cocktails when you get a babysitter in and you want to go to a great cocktail bar. We want it to be Four Pillars. So we want that deep relationship. So suddenly growth isn't just about more people and more people and more people or making different things. Growth is about making more gin and different gin, making things from the gin. It's about deepening the relationship with the customers we have. It's about deepening that sense of fanaticism. And all of a sudden, we're valuing quality over quantity. We're valuing intimacy over scale. And we wake up one day 10 years in and we're selling $35 million of gin a year. We're bigger than Hendrix in Australia. We're in 30 markets worldwide. But we've achieved that through that focus on intimacy, that focus on quality, that focus on fanaticism, rather than suddenly flicking a switch and becoming obsessed with superficial scale.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I think a lot of the time I notice, walking into people's businesses, the fresh pair of eyes, there is so much low-hanging fruit with existing customers and existing clients. But for whatever reason, our strategy has moved on to the next market or the next thing or new things. And actually, like you said, there is so much growth to be had within your existing fanatics, in your words. How did you revisit the growth strategy as you started scaling? Because I thought there was a really interesting point that you talked about of finding the overlap of what's worked to date, but what's going to drive your growth in the future, and the old, what got you here isn't going to be get you there. So you had your growth strategy at start. As it starts booming,
yep.
How did you approach that revisiting stage?
I often think my kids are teenagers now. They're 15 and 13. But I always think when kids are young, one of the things they say to you most is, "But you said," because when you've got little kids, you try.
I'm at that phase with a 6-year-old.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right. So you try and be really definitive. The problem is the thing you say tomorrow completely contradicts the definitive thing you said yesterday, and they remember that. But you said, and you sort of have to say to them, well, the truth of being an adult is that two apparently conflicting things can be true at the same time. So here's the apparently conflicting thing about business. You have to stick to your guns. You have to commit to your theory and believe in your theory and back yourself. And you have to give your theory time to work. If you try and measure the effectiveness today of what you did yesterday will look like a failure. You have to give things time to work. And yet at the same time, you have to constantly interrogate that theory and live in the ambiguity of, well, I'm committed to it, but the world keeps changing. So has the world changed in a way, or has our customer changed in a way, or has our category changed in a way that means I need to challenge that theory? It's horribly ambiguous. It's really stressful as a leader to live in that duality. But I think that's the duality we need to live in. So at 4 Pillars, I'll give you a couple of examples. One I've already talked about. As we grew, we recognized that our next customer growth, as much as we wanted to keep growing and deepening with Fanatics, eventually we've all got too much gin at home. So we need to find other customers, and perhaps those customers are going to have a different relationship with the category. So how do we talk to them? How do we engage them? So we had to have that sort of openness and that curiosity. We also had to look sort of internally, and for the first few years, we drove the growth of 4 Pillars by being really good at telling the stories of each gin that we made. And every gin we made became a new incremental proof point. So first we made Rare Dry Gin. We didn't start with a London Dry. We immediately started with the gin that's behind me, of sort of a modern Australian expression of gin. And modern Australia, it's sort of Mediterranean citrus, it's Asian spice, it's lemon myrtle, it's Tasmanian pepperberry leaf, it's whole fresh oranges. In the Northern Hemisphere, where you and I come from, you're lucky to get orange peel a few months a year. Here we've got whole fresh biodynamic organic citrus 365 days a year. Amazing. Let's distill those flavor advantages and make a gin that's more delicious, more Moorish, more aromatic, easier to drink, all that stuff. And then we soak Shiraz grapes in gin, and that's a proof point of, oh my God, what are these Australians doing now? They're making wine gin, but it's not wine, it's unfermented. It's just all the color and sweetness and flavor of grapes. We make dedicated gin for a Negroni, then a gin for a martini. Then we go to Japan, because we all want to go to the Rugby World Cup, but if we make it a business trip, we can write it off on tax. Thanks, accountants. And then while we're there, we make a gin with the Kyoto Distillery of Japan, because we don't see them as a competitor. We see them as a collaborator, and they love yuzu. And then we come back here and go, oh my God, the yuzu is an incredible fruit. Let's make a yuzu gin. And so telling the stories of each of those gins became a new proof point of our values, back to that notion of a conversational understanding. 4 Pillars isn't Rare Dry Gin. 4 Pillars is this obsession with gin. So each new proof point gives us new stories, new ways in. But then 5 or 6 years in, you go, we're meeting new people who've never tried Rare Dry. And so we've got to go, well, wait a minute, when was the last time we told the story of Rare Dry Gin? So last summer, 10 years on from the founding of 4 Pillars, we were out there talking about when life gives you oranges, make a 4 Pillars G&T, because when life gave us oranges in 2013, we made Rare Dry Gin. So sometimes you do have to check your own logic and go, is there stuff that's obvious to us or boring to us? I mean, when I was in politics, I worked with some extraordinary Australian campaign strategists, and one of them used to talk about the vomit test. And he'd say, mate, you think you've said the message enough. You think you've hit the key messages enough. And I'll tell you when it's enough. It's when you are vomiting in your mouth because you've heard yourself say it so often. And unless you feel like you want to vomit when you say it, the average voter hasn't even heard it. And that always kind of stuck with me. So that balance of, yes, we want to be this dynamic, always innovating, always experimenting, always new, always exciting. But at the same time, have we told the basic stories enough? Have we taken people back to the start? So those types of things, those sort of ambiguities, and then, then that leads to other interesting things. In 2013, if you'd met me then, you'd said, Matt, why don't you make a ready-to-drink gin and tonic can? For a number of reasons, I'd have said no. And reason number one was, have you tried a Gordon's gin and tonic in a can? Like, it was objectively disgusting liquid. But then we fast forward to 2021, we're 8 years into 4 Pillars. The drinking culture of Australia had changed. By 2018, more Four Pillars was being sold in Australia than the entire super premium gin category when we launched. If you went to an art gallery opening back in 2013, probably there was a nicely dressed waiter there with a tray, and that tray would have had some sparkling wine, white wine for the girls, cranny lagers for the boys. That was kind of the default. Fast forward 8 years, everyone was drinking a gin and tonic. Four Pillars in 2019, we supported over 400 separate events in the calendar year. We were absolutely committed to making sure that if anything exciting happened in Australia, ideally, at that launch party, people are drinking a Four Pillars G&T. But that also meant that when people went to their beach house, when people went to a backyard barbecue, they didn't want to take beer or wine, they wanted to take gin. And so we had this sort of relentless pressure to say, well, could we have Four Pillars in a can? So Cameron and Stu spent 2 years trying to get to the point of getting a liquid in a can that was good enough to call it Four Pillars. And today we've got 5 different RTDs. We have 2 alcohol-free Four Pillars products. Again, you can't call it gin because gin has alcohol. So it's an alcohol-free botanical spirit, one modeled on our Rare Dry Gin, one modeled on Bloody Shiraz, which is an absolute game changer. We jumped on the bandwagon, so we literally called it bandwagon. So Four Pillars Bloody Bandwagon is the go if you're not drinking. But all of those things took, to an extent, a reinterrogation of the logic of Four Pillars. So I think that's the truth of any business. Stick to your guns, but at the same time, constantly reinterrogate and go, what has changed in our market, for our consumer, in our category, from our competitors, in the culture? And you just have to live that sort of dual life and split your brain between that conviction and that curiosity.
Yeah. And how do you guide, because I know you talk on this a lot in your keynotes as well around navigating change. And I think right now, it's the topic at the moment. I think the last thing I read was something like there's been 183% increase in disruption in the past 5 years. Every conversation right now is around you're navigating some type of change, whether it's from AI, which we will dive into, whether was political, whether it's the market, whatever it is, there's change. So how, from a practical perspective, how as a leader do you start to navigate through that? Because a lot of the stuff I'm looking at right now, more CEOs resigned last year than any of the previous years. There's a level of burnout. So one of the things I love about your story, your book, what you do, your work, is there's also that practical nature to it.
Yeah.
How do you navigate change?
Goodness me, it's a huge question, and I think the first is to acknowledge the truth that naturally flows from your question, which is what an extraordinarily fatiguing time we are living in. Like leadership is exhausting, decision making is exhausting, making decisions in the face of change is particularly exhausting. I think we need to be vulnerable. We need to sort of be honest about that. I think certain things really help us with that. I think one we've talked about already is this clarity of purpose. When everything is changing very quickly, the ways that we work, the products we make, our current offerings, our current services, they can quickly look tired. They can quickly look redundant. But hopefully, if we have a higher order understanding of our purpose, of the value we create in the world, of the reason we exist, it becomes much easier to adapt that and say, okay, well, if that fundamentally remains true, that there remains this human need or this business need for that, perhaps I do need to look at the way we're going to market, or perhaps I do need to look at the product that we package our services up in or package our value up in. But our fundamental purpose, our reason for being, that sort of essential value we create in the world hasn't changed. I think that North Star can be really, really helpful, and often more helpful than a rigid strategy. I think, back in the old world of having 5-year strategic plans, or your strategic plan might feel redundant in 5 months, but that sense of purpose that you're navigating towards, that North Star, may still endure. So I think that's one. I think the other is the ability to shut out the noise. And that's where I'm really passionate about this idea of having theories of growth, theories of brand, not constantly looking at the numbers. I think we have this addiction right now to measurement and performance, where we are, we're looking at dashboards every single day. And that just pushes us closer and closer to the sort of sales performance conversion end of the funnel, and can lead us to ignore the bigger things, whether externally that's about building brand and awareness and future demand, or internally building culture, building conviction. I think we can get too distracted by those short-term things we can measure, which can distract us from the things that are actually valuable, whereas those theories that we have can sort of bring us back. And that's where that act of storytelling, like I find every time I've had the opportunity to tell the story of the business strategy, it doesn't just help the audience, it helps me. It reminds me, wait a minute, do I believe what I'm saying? Because if I do, that decision we've got to make tomorrow, probably I should go right, not left, because I've just been reminded and reinforced in that. So those aren't easy answers to how to navigate change. But I think if you have those anchors of clarity of purpose and clarity of growth theory, they help you look at the changing data, at the changing environment, and shut out some of the noise. But I think we also have to just accept and be vulnerable to the fact that it is a period of particularly relentless disruptive change. And that's where, as you mentioned, AI is about to provoke, I think, an unprecedented level of change.
So let's go there. Like you said AI at the start, and we said we'd circle back to it. I'm curious on your take, and I'm also sub-questions that curious on your take of how it's going to impact brand and storytelling and some of those, what you talked about, deeply, human emotive experiences.
Yeah. So I'm not an AI expert, right? I'm a human. I think of myself, I sort of divide the world up into this notion of natives and immigrants. And, I've to date, my professional career has been being a digital immigrant in a growing world of digital natives. And the thing about being a digital immigrant is interesting. You came from a pre-digital time and you had to adapt. So, you can still remember why if you had a cassette tape, you needed a pencil because sometimes you need to get the tape back in. And
yes.
digital natives do not know that. Soon we will be thinking about the world of AI natives and AI immigrants. But right now we're still in this world of digital. So I think of myself as someone who's repeatedly had to understand the way that the world has been changed by and has had to adapt to digital change. So I'm old enough to remember the idiotic Microsoft leadership team dancing on the stage at the launch of Windows 95, and all of us thinking we were very smart because we had new desktop computers and we could use Word and Excel. Fast forward 15 years, it's 2010. We're in a world of YouTube and Twitter and Uber and Airbnb and Dropbox and Amazon Web Services, like a world that has been fundamentally changed in every possible way by digital technology. That was a 15-year span. I think 2025 is the new 1995, and I think we'll have reached 2010 by 2030. So I think we should already be thinking about how the world is going to change in 5 years to the same extent. So we're in the dial-up era right now of AI, and very quickly we're going to be in the cloud computing era of AI. But none of us really know what that means. So what can we do as businesses? Well, I think we can look at it at three levels. The first is sort of the productivity and efficiency level, that when new computing and new technology emerges, immediately the means of production change, whether that's producing minutes from your Zoom meetings, because we've all got, and the most exhausting thing now is if you and I have a Zoom and there's 4 of us in the Zoom, there'll be 4 AI note takers joining the meeting as well. So there's the productivity, there's how we're going to make things. At the other end, right at the other end of the spectrum, is the discussion that I don't think many people are having, which is what are the whole new business models? What are the whole new categories? What are the whole new ways that our world is going to be reshaped? And that's really, really hard future-gazing stuff. And some people are going to build extraordinary new businesses and make an extraordinary amount of money. But in the middle is the stuff that all of us can start to wrestle with, which is at the heart of your question. What does AI mean right now for the world of brand building, marketing, sales, go-to-market? I'm seeing 2 big shifts in the age that we live in. So the first is around content. If I think about 4 pillars and one of our great successes, we made and we continue to make exceptional gin. And we made and continue to make exceptional content and take exceptional photos and tell exceptional stories, which almost got people tasting the gin before they'd tasted it. We were delivering tastings through people's eyes and into their brains and through their ears. And that was a weird way to put it, but you get my point.
We can try that afterwards. We've got a bottle behind you.
Well, we can just do the real thing, right? The challenge is now creating noise, creating content, creating slop, as a lot of people are calling it, the cost of that is going to go to zero. So the the piping, the plumbing of the internet. Our world is going to be assaulted by a morass of content like we've never seen before. That was a Donald Trump phrase, like we've never seen. And I think it's going to make it very, very hard for the good stuff to punch through. So I think a world where we were really focused on content marketing, on digital marketing, is going to shift. And I think we're going to enter into a new age where what's going to matter is the human experience. So we're really, really going to have to focus on how we are building brand and building business, creating marketing effectiveness through human experiences. Humanity, ironically, is going to matter more than ever in this world of AI change. So that's the first thing, this age of humanity, this age of experience. The second thing that I think is really quite profound is that ever since Google showed up, we've lived in this age of search where, we left the yellow pages and the white pages long behind us, and we had a more efficient way to search the internet. And first we were asking Jeeves and asking Yahoo and asking all these things, and now we all just go to Google. The growth in search behavior through AI and large language models is profound. It's still in the foothills, but it's going to grow exponentially. And what happens when you search through AI, what happens when you ask ChatGPT, not Google, is you don't get options, you get answers. And so as businesses, what we have to start to think about is not how do I become an option and how do I potentially pay to be on the first page of that list of options? How do I game the search rankings? How do I game the algorithm? The new question is going to be, how do I be the answer? So when Matt, and this is a real one right now, we renovated our house a couple of years ago. We put solar on the roof. We didn't get a battery. We think, okay, we should buy a battery for the house. How do I go about searching for a battery? I'm not searching for it. I'm simply looking for a recommendation. And that recommendation is coming from ChatGPT. It'd be the same if I was looking for a mortgage broker, the same if I was looking for a financial advisor, the same if I was looking for a new car. I'm now going to go and say, this is me. This is what you know about me. This is the data. Give me the shortlist. What happens if your business is not on that shortlist of answers? It's going to be very, very hard to get into my world of consideration. So I think the advice I'd be giving anyone in any business right now is, how are you adapting to this age of experiences and how are you adapting to this age of answers? I think those are the two profound shifts we're going to see in the next couple of years. Beyond that, who knows? Because we're entering into a whole new world.
I think those two are bang on with what I'm seeing. We saw an increase in demand for relationship-based skills and building the human skills, and then back to in-person events and all of those, and then building on that experiences. I think there was a 70% increase last year because it's that, grippingly human aspect. And to your second point in AI, I hadn't really considered it in that context, but I did that just last night. I was up late last night. I wanted to get to bed and I was using Grok and literally was like, which one of these should I book?
Yep.
And it was just, give me the answer. It gave me the answer and I was like, great, done.
So Scott Galloway, the marketing professor, talks about he says the age of brand is over, but he has a very, as I understand it, a very specific intent when he talks about that. And the example he often uses is hotels. He said, look, I'm an old guy. I've been traveling for business for decades. And up until recently, if I was going to a city I didn't know, someone was booking my travel, I'd say, just book me into the Ritz-Carlton, the Mandarin Oriental, the Four Seasons, because their brand guarantees an 8 out of 10 experience. And he says, what we have now, he calls these AI tools weapons of mass diligence. He's like, now I just have to go, I'm a 55-year-old guy having a midlife crisis. I want to go somewhere where young people are partying and I'm going to feel cool. Which hotel should I stay at in Budapest? And ChatGPT is just going to say, well, here are the three. And he's going to go, great, give me the pros and cons. Within a few months' time, he's going to have an AI agent booking that for him and syncing that with travel. And so if your hotel doesn't show up on that, and having a sort of a global brand or having brand awareness, we talked before we started about, both of us have had experience with big corporate brands like IBM in your case and Microsoft, and, that old world of, no one got sacked for buying IBM and no one got sacked for booking the boss into the Four Seasons. Well, now we're going to move beyond the no one got sacked into the, well, this is the best answer and here is the data. And if your business or your brand doesn't appear on that list. So Four Pillars is going to have to adapt to a world of going, my uncle's a gin lover. He needs to try a new gin. These are the gins he's got at home. What gin should I get him for Father's Day? It's going to be really hard to move someone on from the list of 3 gins that Grok or Gemini or ChatGPT serves up. So how are you going to make sure that your brand and your business and your product appears in that answer.
Yeah. And I think it's not just B2C in our personal lives with a hotel. I recently did it with shortlisting some software we need in our business. It's also B2B.
100% it is. And you know, I think in a way, the more data that's available to inform that decision, the more that people are going to look to AI to synthesize that data to make sense. Fundamentally, what are truths that we know about humans? Humans are lazy. Humans are emotional. So, you know, okay, well, synthesize this information for me, crunch the data for me, put that into a recommendation, make me look good, make me sound clever. You know, again, if we are not the B2B recommendation that the AI makes, if anyone's listening to this in the world of B2B sales, technology, think all the time, how are we optimizing our storytelling? So let's take a really tangible example, your website. Your company website, you might look at the data and go, well, we don't get that much traffic. Maybe it's not that important. Maybe we should focus on other things. I'll tell you who's reading your website, the large language models. They're all scraping your website. The number one way that you can influence how you show up in the result from the LLMs is in the stories that you tell about yourselves, the credentials that you put. If you've won awards and they're not sitting on your website, if you've got accolades, reviews, anything that's authoritative, you need to take responsibility for telling that story. So more than ever, you know, I've always felt there's this relationship between storytelling and story doing. The stories that we tell about ourselves and the ways that we create experiences, the ways that we craft products and services so that other people tell the stories that we wish were told about us. Increasingly, the storytelling is going to be done by us, and then it's going to be repeated and relayed by the LLMs. So we've got to take more responsibility than ever before for how we tell our story, even if the audience is just a machine.
That is so fascinating. A lot to digest there. I need to wrap us up with a bit of if there is one thing that leaders, you would love them to take away from this conversation, because we have covered everything from navigating change, AI, brand. We've just covered so much. If there was one thing you feel like you really want leaders to hear right now, what would it be?
I think the unifying theme of all of this is twofold. So it's not a unifying theme. It's two themes.
You've cheated several times in this podcast. You started cheating with two.
It's my political training. I mean, you're lucky I've barely even got close to answering a single question. But I mean, the one thing is do something good.
Yeah.
Make something good. Make something that you believe in. If fundamentally the thing that you are offering to the world is not exceptional, start again. Do something exceptional. But then beyond that, think about two S's. Your job as a leader is to make sense of the world and to tell that story time and again. Be a sense maker. Be a storyteller. Don't retreat behind strategy jargon and leadership logic. Just be the person who brings clarity and brings sense and then tell stories time and again. I think storytelling is the great leadership skill, the great leadership muscle we need to build. But it doesn't matter how good your storytelling is, if back to point one, your product, your service, your business isn't exceptional. So get that done as well.
Matt, you have been, speaking of exceptional, an exceptional guest. I've absolutely loved having you on. We will put all the links to your website, your LinkedIn, your incredible book. I'll give a recommendation. Don't read it whilst you're in bed. I got told off by my other half because I kept laughing, because you've also injected a great bit of humor into it as well. We'll put all the links to that and, of course, your keynote speaking in the show notes. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Loved it.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and follow so that you get our unfiltered conversations every single week.